There have been a lot of changes around here, said the old man proudly, and I want you to know I've been against every one of them. Have you ever noticed that some people have a hard time with change? Some people would rather fight than switch. Their motto seems to be, don't rock the boat, even if it's the Titanic. Of course, some changes are difficult to accept. And someone has said, it just doesn't seem right to go over the river and through the woods to grandmother's condo. And not all change is progress. One analyst predicts that women born after 1960 will have more husbands than children. Now that's something to think about. Doug Larson says, remember when a drug problem was trying to get a prescription filled on Sunday? Remember when jokes that couldn't be told in mixed company weren't? Not all change is good change. In every group, though, there are persons who want to turn the clock back. They want to go back to the way things used to be. Sometimes in the church we call them the Back to Egypt Committee, in honor of those Israelites who wanted to turn back to Egypt rather than endure the march to the Promised Land. Paul confronted his own Back to Egypt Committee in our scripture this morning from Philippians. One group of early Christians wanted the church to remain a Jewish sect. They wanted to enforce strict adherence to the Old Covenant. They wanted to require new believers to be circumcised as well as baptized. They wanted to force new wine into old wineskins. St. Paul was adamantly opposed. His response was, in effect, been there, done that. Don't want the t-shirt. He reminded his listeners that his own credentials as a Jew were impeccable. As an infant, he had been circumcised on the 8th day. He was a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews. He had been a Pharisee, a zealous advocate of the faith, so zealous that he persecuted Christians. But that was then, and this is now. Something had happened to Paul. He had encountered the living Christ. What was it that Paul found in his new faith that he did not find in the faith of his fathers? Could it have been, dare we say, freedom? Certainly, that was part of it. Paul had spent much of his life trying to save himself through strict adherence to the law. But somehow, this was not enough. It never is. Robert Ingersoll was a famous agnostic. He enjoyed arguing, particularly with Christian clergymen. One day, Ingersoll was conversing with Charles Horace Talmage, one of the great preachers of the day, about Connecticut's blue laws, laws that forbid certain activities on Sunday. Would you like to live in a community, Mr. Talmage, Ingersoll asked, where not one cigar could be smoked and not one drop of liquor could be drunk? Certainly, Talmage said. social heaven. And you would like to live, Ingersoll continued, where no one could play on the seventh day and where everyone had to go to church. Yes, sir, Talmadge declared, that would suit me fine. It would be paradise to live in a community where everyone was compelled to go to church on Sunday, where no one could drink a drop, and where the law would make every man good. And you'd think such a man would be a good Christian, Ingersoll asked, a better man than I am? Why, of course, Talmadge responded. Then, said Mr. Ingersoll, I advise you to go to the penitentiary. At Sing Sing, there is a community of 1,500 men and women governed in precisely that manner. They are all good by law. Talmadge learned a lesson that day. Being good simply because it's required has absolutely no saving power. That was a discovery that Paul also made. Keeping the law by itself would never fill his deepest need. Of course, Paul did keep the law. He knew that though the law was imperfect, it was still necessary. Newell Dwight Hillis once pointed out an interesting thing. He noticed that freedom increases in proportion to the number of laws that one obeys. A stone obeying only the law of gravity sits motionless on the ground. On the other